Elena, when I make it big, I'll build us a house by the water.
I don't need a palace, Marco. I just need you.
Every great story begins with hope. Elena's journey started with love so bright it promised forever. But life had other plans. Today, we relive how joy turned into heartbreak, and how tomorrow held a new chance. Elena had always believed in quiet dreams. She wasn't the kind of woman who made a scene when she entered a room. Instead, she carried a calmness about her, something that drew people in without her even realizing it. Born and raised in Verona, she spent her early years surrounded by cobblestone streets, gelato stands, and the constant hum of tourists marveling at Juliet's balcony. At 21, she moved to Milan to study literature at university. Milan felt like another world entirely, fast, loud, ambitious. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry, chasing money, fashion, or status. Elena, with her notebooks filled with poetry, often felt out of place. It was during her second year that she met Marco. The university library was unusually crowded that rainy afternoon. Students huddled around long wooden tables, laptops open, papers scattered. Elena had found a corner seat near the window, watching the rain blur the city skyline when a tall, dark-haired man dropped a pile of architecture textbooks on the table across from her. "Scusa, is this seat taken?" he asked, his Italian accent warm but hurried. Elena shook her head. "No, please. Go ahead." Marco smiled, sliding into the chair. His hands were rough from hours of sketching models and carrying equipment, but his voice carried an easy confidence. He had dreams in his eyes, the kind of dreams that made him talk about designing skyscrapers in Dubai or restoring ancient cathedrals in Rome. They struck up a conversation almost immediately. Elena admitted she was struggling to finish a paper on Dante's Divine Comedy, and Marco teased her. "Architecture is easier," he said with a grin. She raised an eyebrow. "Really? Tell that to your stack of textbooks." They laughed, and for Elena, it was the first time in months that she felt at ease in Milan. Over the following weeks, they kept running into each other. At the cafe near campus, at the tram stop, even once in the park where Elena went to clear her head. Eventually, Marco asked her to join him for an exhibition of architectural models at the university. That evening, walking together through the streets of Milan lit with golden lamplight, Elena realized she was falling for him. Marco wasn't just ambitious, he was charming, witty, and spoke of the future with such fire that she couldn't help but be drawn in. By spring, they were inseparable. Marco would sit in the cafe while Elena scribbled in her notebook, sketching building designs on napkins. She would read her poetry to him, and he would listen as though every word mattered. One night, sitting by the Navigli canals, Marco turned to her and said, "Elena, when I make it big, I'll build us a house by the water. A house full of light, where you can write your books and I can draw my buildings. We'll live like kings and queens." She laughed, leaning on his shoulder. "I don't need a palace, Marco. I just need you." 2 years later, against her parents' cautious advice, Elena married Marco. The ceremony was small, just a few close friends and family at a quiet chapel. She wore a simple lace dress, and he wore a navy suit that didn't quite fit, but in their eyes, they were starting a fairy tale. The early years were sweet but hard. They lived in a modest one-bedroom flat with a leaky roof. Marco struggled to land clients as a new architect, often taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. Elena, having graduated, took up teaching part-time at a language school and spent her evenings writing short stories no one seemed to notice. Still, they had each other. On Sundays, when they couldn't afford to dine out, they would picnic in the park with bread, cheese, and cheap wine, pretending it was a feast. Marco always promised, "One day, Elena, we'll look back on this and laugh. One day, I'll give you everything you deserve. Life changed dramatically when Elena found out she was pregnant. She had expected one baby, but the doctor's smile turned into surprise as he pointed at the ultrasound screen. "Congratulations," he said, "you're expecting 3. 3? Elena gasped, clutching Marco's arm. 3 blessings, Marco whispered, though his voice trembled with both joy and fear. The pregnancy was difficult, but Elena endured. When the triplets, Matteo, Luca, and Sofia, were born, their tiny cries filled the hospital room, and tears streamed down Marco's face. "We're rich already," he said, holding them close. For Elena, those were the happiest days of her life. Exhausting, yes, but filled with love. She stayed up through sleepless nights, feeding 3 babies in rotation, while Marco tried to keep the bills paid. They were young parents, drowning at times, but still holding hands. But as the years passed, their fairy tale began to crack. Marco's architectural firm struggled. Larger companies won contracts, leaving him with scraps of projects that barely covered expenses. Debt piled up. He grew restless, comparing himself to his peers who drove expensive cars and traveled for work. Elena noticed the change. He became quieter, often brooding late into the night, staring at unpaid bills. "Marco," she whispered once as they lay in bed, "we'll get through this. We've survived worse." He sighed, staring at the ceiling. "Maybe you're used to this life, Elena. But I want more." Her heart sank at the words, but she stayed silent. She loved him still, and she believed their love could weather anything. What Elena didn't realize was that Marco had already started resenting her sacrifices. In his eyes, she was no longer the carefree student who laughed at his dreams. She had become the tired mother of 3, with little time for romance, and in his bitterness, he blamed her for the life they had. The seeds of their unraveling had been planted. And though Elena still looked at Marco as the man who had once promised her a house full of light, Marco now saw only shadows of disappointment. The beginning of their love story, once so sweet, was slowly turning into the beginning of her greatest trial. Have you subscribed yet? Please do so you don't miss any of our beautiful stories of triumph. The triplets had just turned 5 when the tension in Elena and Marco's marriage reached its breaking point. Their small flat in Milan, once alive with laughter and bedtime stories, had grown heavy with silence. Marco stayed out late more often, claiming he was networking with clients, but Elena knew the truth. Most of those nights were spent drowning in frustration at local bars. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter like unwelcome guests. Elena tried to keep things afloat by working extra hours at the language school and editing manuscripts for aspiring writers online. Her evenings were spent grading papers while the children played in the next room. But Marco only grew colder. One evening, Elena set the table with simple pasta and bread. The children sat chattering, their voices bright against the gloom. "Papa, today I drew a tower," Luca said proudly, showing Marco his paper. Marco glanced at it briefly, then pushed the plate of pasta away. "Again with towers? Do you think towers put food on this table?" The boy's face fell. "Marco," Elena said softly, "don't be harsh. He just wants to show you what he learned." Marco's voice rose, sharp as broken glass. "What I've learned, Elena, is that dreams don't pay rent. And maybe I've been dreaming with the wrong person beside me." The words hung in the air like smoke. The children froze. Elena's heart clenched, but she said nothing. Conversations turned to blame. The arguments became more frequent. "You're always tired, always busy with those children," Marco snapped one night. Elena stared at him in disbelief. "Those children are ours, Marco. You think they raise themselves?" He paced the room, his hands raking through his hair. You don't understand. My colleagues are building real firms, winning contracts. And me? I'm stuck in this flat, with 3 mouths to feed and a wife who spends her life correcting essays. Tears burned Elena's eyes. I work because you can't carry this alone. I've given everything, Marco. My time, my youth, my body, for you, for this family. Is that not enough? But his silence answered louder than words. It was a cold December evening when Marco finally made his decision. Snowflakes drifted past the window as Elena prepared the children for bed. Marco stood by the door, his suitcase half-packed. Elena turned, her hands trembling. Marco? What are you doing? I can't do this anymore, he said flatly. I'm leaving. Her knees nearly buckled. Leaving? Just like that? He didn't meet her eyes. You've become a weight, Elena. I need freedom. I need a chance to live the life I want. Maybe with someone who actually believes in me. Her voice cracked. I believed in you when no one else did. When you had nothing, I stood by you. And now, when things are hard, you abandon me? Marco's jaw tightened. You wouldn't understand. Isabella does. The name hit her like a stone. Isabella, a wealthy businesswoman Marco had met at an architecture conference. Elena had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed was a blade through her chest. You're leaving me for her? Elena whispered. For a chance at a better life, he muttered. And I don't want a fight. I'll send the papers tomorrow. True to his word, the papers arrived. Elena sat at the kitchen table, staring at them through a blur of tears. The children played quietly in the living room, unaware that their world was collapsing. When Marco came by for her signature, he avoided the children's eyes. Elena, her face pale but composed, confronted him. Marco, do you realize what you're doing? You're not just divorcing me. You're walking away from them too. He shifted uncomfortably. I'll send money when I can. Money? Her voice broke. They don't need just money. They need a father. His silence was the final betrayal. They don't need just money. They need a father. His silence was the final betrayal. With shaking hands, Elena picked up the pen. She paused, staring at the man she had once loved with every fiber of her being. One day, Marco, she whispered, you will regret this. Not because of me, but because of what you're throwing away. She signed. That night, after putting the children to bed, Elena sat alone by the window. The snow outside glittered under the street lamps, mocking her loneliness. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let the tears fall freely. She had given Marco everything, her youth, her devotion, her endless support. And in return, he had left her with nothing but 3 children and a broken heart. Yet, even in her grief, a fire began to burn within her. She remembered her father's words long ago, Elena, life doesn't break strong women. It only bends them until they rise again. She didn't know how, and she didn't know when, but deep inside, Elena made a silent vow, she would rebuild. Not for Marco, not even for herself, but for Matteo, Luca, and Sofia. Across town, Marco was celebrating his freedom with Isabella in a glittering restaurant. Crystal chandeliers reflected in his wine glass, but as he laughed too loudly at Isabella's jokes, he felt a pang deep inside. For just a second, he saw Elena's face in his mind, the woman who had once patched his shirts, whispered encouragements, and believed in his wildest dreams. He pushed the thought away, burying it under forced laughter. But life has a way of remembering what we forget. And while Marco thought he had gained the world, he had, in truth, lost the greatest treasure he would ever have. This was just the beginning. Divorce didn't end Elena's story, it sparked a transformation. Stay with me as we see how she rose from the ashes in the next chapter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep walking with us through Triumph Legends.